Hey, welcome to this supplemental video. This is going to give you a little bit of an introduction to being able to understand guitar strings and choices that you have in different brands, manufacturers, gauges, coatings, etc. And just give you a brief overview of kind of what all of these things mean. How do they influence what strings you should be playing on your guitar? And are you playing the right ones or the wrong ones? Side note, there's no necessarily right or wrong strings for you. There's many different options and choices and things that you could put together to make that happen. But you will have the ability to be informed making those decisions so that you can make things a little bit easier on yourself and hopefully on your guitar too, because there's certainly choices that need to be taken into account for every manufacturer that make different types of guitars and bridge systems, etc. And making sure that picking the right strings to be able to support those things and the type of music you want to play are going to be critical in that spot. So today we're going to take my Gibson Les Paul here, and we're going to give it a little bit of love. So we're going to change the strings. We're going to give it a good cleaning. I'm also going to show you how to go about cleaning a fretboard. So in this case, this is a rosewood fretboard. So I have oil that I'm going to treat the fretboard with, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Now, there's different materials you can use to clean your fretboard. So it kind of depends board to board, right? So you need to make sure you have the right material too. But in this particular case, I'm going to show you what to do here. This is a pretty standard guitar, and it's pretty close to a lot of these style guitars that you're going to find. So this guide should at least give you the ability to navigate most of those. Now, I will get into another video as well. Next time I need to restring my Fender Stratocaster, I'll give you a video on that as well as making some intonation adjustments. So that way you can see the whole process end to end. Getting into tune, being able to reset and clean everything off with the fretboard, cleaning the guitar in general, and then ultimately setting intonation and making sure we're in spec. I'll even take a couple of the strings and throw them way out of spec just to be able to show you what that sounds like and what to do to combat that. So let's get started. All right, so it's a bit of a spa day for my Gibson Les Paul here. What I'm going to walk you through is being able to take off this old set of strings. They've been on here for about a year, definitely too long. So take off the old strings. We're going to give the guitar a once-over cleaning, and then we're also going to do a fretboard conditioner. So I have a White Bond fretboard conditioner by Ernie Ball that basically is an oil-based conditioner. And when you put it on here, not only is it going to help to clean the fretboard as I go across it, but it's also going to condition and moisturize it. So that way this wood is nice and oiled. So it will hold in any moisture that it does have, but it won't take in too much. And it also won't dry and crack and have other issues like that as well. So we'll make sure that this is nice and conditioned and looks good. And then finally, we'll put a new set of strings back on there. I'll describe a little bit about the string choice that I have, which is the same that are currently on here right now. Okay, so I know this guitar is already configured to accept that. That's going to be nice and easy, but I'll describe to you kind of what I like about these strings, and then ultimately kind of walk you through being able to get it tuned. Okay, so we'll go through the tuning process. And this is one thing that I will mention, there's gonna be a couple times so I'm gonna pause this video or maybe even fast forward it just so we can get through what we need to get through, especially with the conditioning. I'm gonna let that conditioner sit for about 10 minutes. I'm not gonna have you sit here the whole time waiting for that. But once we get wrapped up, I'm actually going to cut, and then we're going to go to me holding the guitar, working to get it tuned. That is something that is really critical. A lot of folks don't necessarily think about this. I know there's some luthiers that have the ability to do these things and swear by, the way they do it. Maybe they tune a little sharp so they know how things are going to work. But in my opinion, tuning the guitar when it's on the bench is not a good idea. It puts the guitar into a different position to get to a point where the neck is slightly altered and the way that the guitar's internals are sitting is slightly altered to a point where you're not going to get an exact tune when it's like this. You would have to do something to modify a little bit over, a little bit under tune to be able to get it where you need it to be. I don't want to do that guesswork. I don't like doing that. I'd rather just tune it the right way the first time, holding it just like you would in that position. That will put the guitar in the right place for you to be able to work with it. Okay. So let's get started. I'm going to start this other camera here so I'll have a separate view. What we're going to get started with is we're going to loosen each one of the strings, which basically means we're going to detune each string. Okay, so we're just going to get these loose. And the reason why I'm doing this is that I like to cut my strings before I take them off. It makes them easier, and quite honestly, it makes it so they aren't going to come out and poke you in the eye or stab the guitar, or just generally be difficult to deal with. When you have a whole big floppy string in front of you, it's a little bit more difficult than it needs to be to work with. It's just not necessary. So we're going to go ahead and detune these. Again, this is a fixed bridge guitar. So another thing that I'll point out too is if I had a floating bridge guitar, I generally don't like to do this. I generally don't like to take all the strings off at the same time. I'll take one at a time off as I move across it, unless I really have to do something that requires me to take all the strings off. It's generally something I don't like to do, to take all the tension off the bridge, and the neck for that matter too. But in this case, this being a fixed bridge, and I know it's not going to cause a problem for me, I have no problem whatsoever doing that. So all the strings are nice and loose now, as you can hear. It sounds fantastic, right? So I have two tools here that I use generally. I have a pair of side cutters, and I also have just a standard pair of needle nose pliers. Okay, this just comes in handy to be able to hold the strings and slightly pull them through without having to use your fingers to do so. Just like a little bit of an extra grip. What I'm gonna do with these side cutters is two things. One, I'm going to snip these old strings. So let me start here first. And we're gonna snip them right here in the middle of the pickups, okay? And like I said, I detuned so they're loose, so they're not flying up and hitting me in the eyes or doing anything crazy like that. But it's also nice and easy to be able to get all these strings off of here, okay? So we're going to do this, take all of them off. There we go. Set these down briefly. I'll set these side cutters down. Now, the only other thing that I should have to do with these side cutters is once we put the new strings on, you'll have the ends of the strings that are longer at the edges here. We're just going to trim those off with those side cutters. That'll be the only other time you're probably going to see me pick those up. So you really don't need a lot of tools to be able to do this, but you definitely need those cutters to be able to trim those at the end. That's a must. Please don't be one of those people that just leaves the big gnarly ends hanging off of your guitar and doing that. Not only does it just kind of look lame, in my opinion, my humble opinion, but also, quite frankly, I can't tell you how many times people have done that and I've been around them and end up getting stabbed in the face of the arm or whatever with all these like gnarly strings that are hanging off of there. It's just not good. And quite honestly, it also ruins the finish of the guitar sometimes too, if you're not careful. So I don't like to do that personally. Anyways, let's see. So we've got all of these trimmed off. Now, another thing that I will point out briefly on this guitar is this has a set of locking tuners on it. Okay, so I need to take these out a little bit to unlock these strings from the tuning machines themselves. So what does this mean if you're not familiar? Is basically there's a small threaded piece of metal on the back of each one of these tuning machines, okay? And when you tighten that up, it actually suppresses a little piston inside of the tuning machine up to the top where the eyelet is for the string to actually go through. So basically it grabs onto the string and it holds it. So it gives it more even tension through that tuner. That way you're a little less prone to string slippages and things of the sort, okay? So now we're getting these off. Right, so there we go. We have taken our old strings off. One more thing that I'm going to need to do here temporarily for this guitar is take the bridge. I don't want this to go flying off and hit the guitar or doing anything. So take this 2-pneumatic bridge off and just set it off to the side for now. We don't need it until we put the new strings on. Okay. So we'll take these old strings and get them set over here. Flopping around with these. I'm sorry. Give me 1 second. I don't want these flying across the room and me stepping on them later. I don't need that kind of negativity in my life. All right, let's see. What do we want to do now? So now let's go ahead and get started with cleaning the fretboard and putting on a little bit of this conditioner. Move a couple things out of the way here. I'm gonna take this little pack of conditioner. It's just basically a wet wipe that's inside of this package, okay? There's many different ways you can get these too, by the way. So you can totally get these with like a spray bottle and a rag and lots of other things. But I like the Ernie Ball ones for the fretboard conditioner. It's just nice, easy. I keep these packets around with me in my gig bag over there and just always have them with me. So they really are pretty easy to access. So what we're going to do is just go ahead and wipe this on. Now I can tell you that I've already kind of cleaned this fretboard But I'm going to go over it once more with this rag now that I have the strings completely off. Okay, so I'm just going to do a quick wipe down on these, and then I'm going to take this packet and I'm just going to lightly massage this conditioner into the fretboard on this part here. And I'm going to let that dry for about 10 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and stop talking and just start kind of cleaning this up, and we'll go a little bit and fast forward. And then once we're about 10, 15 minutes after, I'll bring the video back, and then we'll keep talking from there. Okay? Okay, so we got the fretboard conditioning complete. I did 2 coats, and while I was at it, I also did just the fast wipe down on the guitar. So that way you wouldn't have to sit all the way through that. So we fast forwarded through some of that. I'm just going to take this rag and wipe off the little bit of excess conditioner that we have on the fretboard. Then we're going to get started applying our new strings, okay? So give me just a moment to do that, and we'll get that back on there. Just for note, you don't have to condition your fretboard every time you change strings. I don't, for sure. But I do make it a habit to do this at least once a year. There's a lot of people that would actually say twice a year. You see, I have a fair amount of guitars, though. That doesn't mean that I should slack on taking care of them, but I don't do the full treatment all the time like that. I generally do it yearly as a routine and then kind of rotate guitars through and kind of make that happen. So generally that's what I do. If you have less guitars and are more of a sane person than I am, then definitely feel free to do this as often as you like. I don't know if there's necessarily too much that you do, but do remember, use something, and this is the critical part, use something that is accurate for the type of wood that your fretboard is, and that it's not going to be anything that's water-based. Anything water-based is definitely going to damage this wood, okay? You do not want to do that. This isn't just like something that's ultra wet, like water, that I'm wiping on here. It's a very specific solution for this type of fretboard, okay? And since this is a rosewood fretboard, that's what it's made for. That's what it's going to be compatible with, okay? So you are going to have to look up your guitar's manufacturer to see what your fretboard material is to be able to determine what the right kind of conditioner is for it. There's a couple of different kinds out there, okay? So just want to make sure you do that before you go and ruin your guitar because you were trying to listen to me and I wasn't specific enough. So, okay, that's it. Now let's get started with our strings here. So, as you can see, I'm going to hold this up briefly. Here, I'll get it right in front of this other camera here. I use NYXL Leodarios. This is a 1052 set. Okay, but really good luck with these. I like them. 10 being my low string, 52 being my high string. Okay, so let's go ahead and rip this bag open. All right, the strings come in a package just like this. Okay, so they're all packaged together. Let me pop this open. Now, this is pretty critical. So I have a 6-string set. So forget this 7 and 8 that you see here because they reuse the bags on some of these for up to 8-string guitars. Okay, this is just a 6-string set, as I showed you. This was the strings again, just so you can see for reference. Okay, so ignore the 7 and 8. This is the color coordination that we have for each one of these strings. It's pretty easy to tell for the most part what you're dealing with, but when you do get to your high strings, your 2 and 1, it could get a little confusing because they almost look identical. So you do want to take a look at these numbers to make sure you have the right ones. Okay, so let's take a look. I usually start stringing from my 6, my low end, and going up. You can go in any direction, really. I know people have lots of different ways that they like to do this, but me, I like to start with my lows and then go to my highs. Okay, so I'm going to start with brass, which is going to be my 6th string here. So let's get this up here as I drop it. That's awesome. Let me set this one back up here. Okay, so this is a fixed bridge. Okay, so how you get started is you take the end of the string. So you have a string looks like this. I guess I'll take a step back really quick. So here's the string. Okay, they're all the same. They're just different sizes, different gauge. Okay, this end right here with the eyelet is going to be the part that actually affixes to the bottom part of this bridge here. Okay, so in this case, and I'll slide this off really quick just to be able to show you. Okay, when this is in the guitar going this direction, okay, the string passes through the bottom of this, our bridge. Okay, and it pulls all the way up to here, and now that eyelet is hitting a backstop here. This is what creates our string tension. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and put this bridge back on, if I can I? It's fighting me. Hold on one second. I'm sorry. I'm bumbling around here, but it's not wanting to go in. So let's get it. There we go. Okay. So we'll take our string. We will pull him through this bottom slot. Pull up and across our saddle. Okay. Our saddle sits right here. And this is set with all of our different string height adjustments. Okay. And this is another pro tip. So before I go to put this on, all of the holes that I have in my tuning machines, okay, are all going in this direction. Okay. So they're going the same direction as your nut, straight across like this. Okay. And I have a very specific way that I do my, my looping through here. So I start by putting the string through the inside of that eyelet going towards the outside, okay? And I pull like so, and I get it just about that tight. So you want it to be about this tight, maybe not much tighter, okay? Where that is. So far, I have the tuning pegs eyelets going straight across, going in correspondence with where the bridge is, okay? I'm sorry, not the bridge, the nut. And I have that pulled through from the inside to the outside. Now, I take this end of the string, okay, and I'm going to loop it back, and I'm going to actually go around the tuning peg, and I'm going to put this underneath where the string has come across and into the machine peg. I'm going to put it underneath there, and I'm going to pull this string to make a little collar right here, right around the tuning machine, okay? And then because of the fact that I have locking tuners, I'm going to thread this in the back, the machine peg for the locking tuner in the back, to grab a hold of the string as it sits right now. Okay, if you don't have these, you just skip this step and you start to tighten the string. Now, I don't want you to tighten and tighten and tighten and make it like really ultra tight. We're not trying to do that yet, okay? We're just trying to get the little bit of tension going here for this string. So let's get started by turning it. Okay, we'll get just enough tension that we start to feel it. That's good. Okay, now you might be asking, why do you do this loop around the edge here? And that is to make sure, just make sure we've got that. Yep, okay. This is to make sure that we're gripping the best that we can on the tuning machine with the string. So basically, you can think about it almost like a slip collar slightly, where you're grabbing it, hold of it, and it's just keeping this string even more in contact with the tuning machine and in contact with itself, so it's not going to slip out and cause any issues for you, okay? So now that we've got that, let's just go ahead and move on, and we'll do all the rest of these, and I'll probably put this in fast forward just so you can watch me progress, but not have to sit here the whole time, okay? Okay, so now that we have gotten all of these threaded through, we are going to pull each one of the strings back, and we are going to clip just at the edge of where we have threaded in the string to the eyelet. Okay. All right, there we go. Nice and fresh. Now we will swap over so that you can watch me put the guitar back into tune, and that's it. Okay, so we've got everything back together. All we need to do is get the strings back in tune, and then just make sure everything's holding steady the way we expect it to. Okay, so I have the headstock tuner on right now. You should be able to see that in the video. Try to lean the guitar a little bit more forward for you. I have a floor tuner as well that I'm plugged into that I'm going to use, but I'm just basically going to step through the process of just dialing in each string and then making that happen. So I'm probably just going to do the fast forward thing again so you can kind of see this work. But essentially what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move from the top string to the bottom string and then back again. I'm just going to keep doing this rotation of set this string, then the next, the 5, then the 4, then the 3, then the 2, then the 1, then start back over again until we have everybody in tune the way we want them to be. There's a lot of different ways you can tackle kind of doing that. Specifically on floating bridges and stuff, you're definitely going to have a different methodology of being able to tune the guitar and going string for string. On a fixed bridge, it's not really all that much to it. People just have different ways they like to do it. I do it like this. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's pretty easy to be able to get in tune once you get there. So the only thing you're going to see me do is I'm going to step through. I'm going to do that. Then once I get each string into to tune, I'm going to do a couple of kind of harsh bends where I just basically bend a whole note or something like that right around the 7th fret, just something like that, something I can just grab onto kind of easy and pull. And that kind of helps to stretch these strings out. There are always going to be a little bit of stretching that these strings are going to do to be able to make sure that they're seated. And that's also to help them seat properly against the nut, against the bridge, the saddle. Like, things are going to slightly move when you do this. Now, you're not yanking, like, you're not putting full tension and yanking as hard as you can to like really rip these things out of here, okay? You certainly don't want to move. And this is the thing I will tell you is each one of these strings are across the bridge with tension and are in a good place right now in their grooves. Don't pull hard enough to pull them off of that, okay? You're definitely going to watch out for where you have these seated. Same with your nut at the top. You want to make sure that these strings are staying where you're putting them. They should, because we've tightened them enough that they're at least holding tension, but they're not quite in tune yet, okay? So I'm talking about just lightly doing one of these, just enough that you can just feel the strings slightly pull. Do that just a couple of times, and then, like I said, each time you put the string into tune, just try to do a couple of bends and then move on to the next one. And you should get to the point where when you go to do a couple of bends and then recheck your tuning, it should stay exactly where you put it. Once you have that, you have tuning stability in each one of these, you should be good to go, okay? So I'll get started now. Like I said, I'll fast forward really quick. All right, there we have it. So I took 2 passes. Each time I just did the same method. So I got it up to tune where it needed to be. So again, as a reminder, E, A, D, G, B, E, starting with your lowest string to your highest string. Eddie, 8, dynamite, goodbye, Eddie. Okay. And that's where we're getting to basically with a standard E tuning. And so I did 2 passes. First one, I just got it into tune where it needed to be. So each string's there, and then I bent, and then it took it out of tune like I expected because they weren't quite stretched. So I pulled it back up and just tuned it back again to where that was. And then I went all the way through the process, and all the rest of the strings came back, did a once over more on that. And now I can confirm E, A, D, G, B, E, just like I expected. Perfect tune. Good to go. That's it. That's all there is for a fixed bridge. It's a pretty straightforward version. I'll do another video when I can of a strat, so you can see doing that along with doing some intonation work. And then finally, I'll take on one of my floating bridge tremolos at some point too, and just show you how to deal with, some of the gotchas of that. I don't know if I'll go too deep into changing tuning and I'm going to reset up and doing all of that. But we'll see where we get as the series kind of progresses. But I definitely want to show you that because I don't want to leave people with floating bridges out. They're definitely cool. They have their place. I just figured the most straightforward way was to get you with a fixed bridge, which is what we've done here. And most beginners, that's exactly what I would tell you too, is try to stick, if you can. You don't have to, but if you can get into a fixed bridge first, it's probably a little bit more straightforward for you for doing relative maintenance without having a lot of uphill battles of how to work with that, because you really want to take out the guesswork. I mean, tremolos, there's things that happen there that just take a lot of time and patience, and new players struggle with that a little bit, but I digress. At any rate, We're in tune. You've seen the process now. Come back to this video whenever you need. I'm going to probably post a short as well that just condenses all this into a very small little succinct piece. I'll put a link to that in the description too, so that way you can see this advanced blurb and all the pieces that we've gone through, and you can jump to just the parts you need as utility whenever you do need to go tuning your guitar. Really quick as well, I'm going to play each note of E, A, D, G, B, E in tune, so that way if you don't have a tuner or you have something that's happened that's causing you to not have anything available to you, this will at least give you a reference that you can listen to and at least tune by your ear to potentially use. Okay, so starting with low to high E. Okay, E, A, D, G, B, E. Until next time. Have you attempted to shop for guitar strings, either at a physical store or online, and you've been immediately intimidated by all the choices and brands you have to choose from? Trust me, you're not alone. Most anyone starting with this instrument is intimidated. Even seasoned players quickly confused by all of the options that are out there. I'm not going to attempt to walk you through all of those options, but I can at least describe to you the basics. Then you'll understand what some of the terms mean, and it'll hopefully help you to select the best options for you, okay? So I'm going to start out by making a personal statement about guitar strings. They are a very intimate choice for players, and many different factors come into play when you're making that decision. Sound quality, finger feel, guitar setup, musical genre. So where do you start to decide on what strings are best for you? So let's go with number one. Try to find the original specs of your guitar and manufacturer recommendations. So this is going to be an excellent way for you to establish the intended string tension and string gauge sizing tolerances. If your guitar isn't heavily modified, these recommendations are definitely going to help at least determine what ballpark you're in for string gauges and they're supportable. Okay. Secondly, what type of music do you prefer to play and in what tunings? Playing classic rock, folk, country, other lighter styled music, not metal, basically, the lighter strings are probably better suited for you. Okay. The string is measured, by the way, the gauge of a string in 1/1000 of an inch. A 10 gauge string would be something like 0.010 inches. And a 46 gauge string would be 0.046 inches, okay? Thinnest string is always going to be your high E, your first string, with the thickest always being your low E or your sixth string, okay? String gauge is a primary element when purchasing guitar strings. So string gauges have many different aspects to influence, right? That your sound, your overall string tension, and definitely if adjusting your tuning down or up, as well as nut and saddle fit, okay? I'm going to be focusing primarily on a fixed bridge for this discussion. Floating bridge or a tremolo system is something I'll get into at a later time, but just know that those bridges require a very delicate balance of your string tension. They're a lot more finicky than dealing with a fixed bridge. A fixed bridge is also going to have tolerances that will impact performance, but are generally more forgiving than those of a floating bridge. So scale length also affects string gauge selection. So a baritone or a guitar with a longer scale length can support higher gauged or thicker strings at a lower tuning than its standard scale length counterpart. So what string gauges do I prefer? Depends on the guitar and what I plan to play on it. Like I keep mentioning, I'm a metal and rock player and I down tune often. So I also own many extended scale length guitars, and I generally default to selecting 10 by 52 gauge strings for my 6 strings for the most part. String gauge fits my comfort. It feels right. I like the sound I get out of it, especially with my NYXL Diodarios that I generally work with, and provide excellent tuning and intonation stability. I generally just don't have any major issues to note. Now, granted, I have all my guitars set up for these specific gauges as well. So once they're done, there's not really a lot of muss or fuss, right? There's minor intonation tweaks every now and then that I might need to make, but for the most part, when I'm changing strings like for like, I know what I'm going to expect. My guitar already knows what it's set up for, so we're not going to be that far out of spec, all right? So what's another aspect, another major aspect that you need to think of when you're working with your guitar strings and decisions that you're making? Intonation. So this is a new term. When an instrument is intonated correctly, okay, all the open strings and notes on the fretboard sound at their correct. If your guitar still sounds noticeably out of tune, even after you've tuned the open strings, then the intonation is more than likely off. And that means basically the instrument is out of tune with itself. Okay. So that's something that we need to consider, is making sure that your guitar is intonated when you are changing gauges of string and tuning. Both of these things are necessary, or else it's all for naught. If you're going to go play the guitar and it sounds completely out of tune, even when you've put the opens in tune, that's not good. All right. So I play more classic rock and grunge era type style music on my Fender Strat. And generally that's a choice that I make because I think the guitar sounds a little bit better and more suited for some of that kind of classic rock grunge era style. But also, it's one that I don't want to have as thick of strings on. And I actually run a 942 set of D'Addario NYXLs on. It gives me the ability, and I'm actually running lighter strings on the 321 strings as well. My high strings are a lighter gauge too, so they're thinner, making it easier for me to be able to do bends and different things like that, different techniques while I'm playing. Generally, that type of music has more of those elements in it, and that guitar is much more suited for it with lighter gauge strings. So I just prefer to be able to do that. So again, it does make a difference on the style of guitar and the type of music that you really play on it. Okay. Thicker strings also tend to sound fuller than their lighter gauge counterparts. So you can generally gain slightly lower string action, and that's basically the distance of your string from the fretboard, which also means that thicker strings have a darker tone as well, while lighter strings have a more vibrant tone. The strings composition and coding are also impacting the sound too. So making decisions on a specific vendor with a specific type of wind and potential coding on these strings will cause a difference in the way those strings sound beyond just the actual gauge of the string itself. Okay. So it can become a bit more of a challenge and difficulty to dial in thicker gauge strings due to something else called fret buzz, which is a deadening of a fretted note due to too much contact with the string to the fretboard. So every guitar has a small amount of fret buzz, right? But sometimes, in most cases, minor fret buzz, it isn't going to be something that's perceivable on an electric guitar. It's not going to come through the amp. You're not going to really hear it as much. You might hear it a little bit on the guitar, but if it's just a little bit of fret buzz, you're not going to hear it actually emanate into your actual mix, right, when you're playing. Now, what I will tell you is when it gets really bad, not only will you hear it come through the amp, and potentially if you're recording, you'll hear it in the mix coming out that way as well. You'll also have fret buzz bad enough that it will mute a string when you're playing it. So if you fret, right, somewhere, and it's enough fret buzz that it's actually going to cause that string to stop emanating sound when it's doing that. And that's because when you're playing with fret buzz, it means that your strings are too low to the fretboard in relevation. And there's a couple ways you can remediate this, but basically what that's going to do is, in extreme cases, you're going to have it so your string, when fretted, is going to be tapping on other frets on the fretboard enough that it's making a contact, and it's going to stop the string from being able to vibrate, ergo making the noise that it's being picked up. Okay, so there's a couple different ways you can fix that, from making truss rod adjustments to maybe potentially bridge and saddle adjustments, as well as nut changes too, that can all impact your distance of your strings from your frets, and that's going to help with fret buzz. But generally, if you're going with thinner frets, that usually means that you can go a little bit lower, a little bit closer to the fretboard to get that really smooth, what they call low action. Okay, I love low action, and I try to generally put all of my guitars into that state. Sometimes I do deal with a little bit more fret buzz than others, and honestly, that comes with a number of different multitudes of scenarios, like I just mentioned. I'm not going to go into all that, or also be talking at you even more today than I am, but just know that a little bit of fret buzz is okay. Too much isn't that great. So if you're making some adjustments in this space, try to go for a sweet spot where it feels comfortable to you and you're not feeling fatigued when you're playing, yet at the same time, you're giving yourself enough headroom that you're not going to be cutting off ringed notes or anything like that because you have too low of action. Okay, so let's also take a look at what you can do to mix and match guitar string gauges. So do you have to always buy a set that's a very set amount of gauges for all 6 of your strings? No. You can choose whatever you'd like. Again, this is one of those scenarios where you're going to be able to experiment an awful lot with what works for you. Okay. Now, one thing that I will warn you about is as you start to branch out, there's a lot of different sets that are what are sometimes called hybrid sets. And this can mean a couple of different things, but usually in the case of calling a string set a hybrid set, it's because there's either a different mix of materials being used and or a different amount of difference in the size of the gauge of strings. Some will have a really light high end with a really deep low end. Some will have a really deep low end and not so high end. There's many different ways you can do that, and it's all going to come down to personal preference and what you like and how that mix sounds to you. Okay, so you'll be making a lot of those decisions, but you could also, in a lot of cases, buy individual strings. Okay, and in bulk, even if you want to, that are very specific sizes. If you start doing something like that, that's totally fine. All I will say is make sure as you're experimenting that all of your strings are intonating and working the way you expect them to, not just some of them. Make sure to test all of them and really be thorough. And I say this because if you go too far out of spec with some of these gauges of strings and the choices that you're making there, you're going to find potentially that you're causing some string tension problems, okay? And if you do that, you're going to start to experience some issues with keeping your guitar in tune and also being able to keep it intonated appropriately. So definitely make sure you're watching out for that. So what else do we have to say? What else do you have to worry about when you're making selections on strings? So is it just the gauge? No. There's also different materials that strings are made of and their coating, okay? So the core of most guitar strings are going to be made of the same material. It's not much of a difference there, really, besides maybe saying like metal versus like nylon strings. That's obviously a extreme difference, right? But for most all metal-based strings, okay, the core of that metal is going to be the same. What really sets them apart is what they're wound with, what they're wrapped with, I should say, and then ultimately if they're coated or not. And sometimes there is a difference in the machining of those two, and I'll get into that in just a moment. So guitar strings cores are almost all the same, okay? First type that you'll see, and this is really what you'll see in most all guitar strings that are out there. It's one of the most popular types, nickel-plated steel. Okay, so nickel-plated steel is one of the most popular wrap style guitar strings. So what that means is the core is wrapped in a nickel-plated steel. Okay, got a snappy sound, pretty smooth feel. They're generally pretty good. I definitely don't mind them. I think most people would be completely fine with them. This is probably the best place I would start because you know what? There's a reason why there's the most popular strings and they're out everywhere. They do sound good. They're pretty good on the ability to have a lot of different mixes from vendors on sizes and gauges and such, as well as just the general availability of them. Okay, so that's one thing. Now you also have pure nickel wrapped ones, which are kind of sought after for more warmer sounds. So they sound slightly warmer. They still feel good, but they're just a little bit different. You'll understand what I mean by this. You'll have brighter sounding strings, and then you'll have a little bit darker sounding, and then in between warm sounds that kind of come through there too. And this is generally just something that you'll have to kind of experiment with. But pure nickel wrap is a little bit warmer of a sound, has a smoother feeling too than just your standard nickel plated strings. Okay, so this also comes down to how your fingers feel when you're playing the guitar. Do they feel good to you or not? And then finally you have stainless steel wrap, which is a much brighter sound that's a lot more audible with active pickups especially. At least that's been my experience with them. I generally do like stainless steel wrapped strings. They're pretty good. They're durable. You won't have as many string breaks if you do. I don't really have that many string breaks though, to be honest with you. But then again, I play thick strings, so I'd have to be bending a lot harder to make those break. And for the most part, I don't have it happen, but there's a first for everything. So what else? So there's a lot of other alloys out there that'll give you all different variations of warmth and tone. I'm not going to go through all the rest of them that are there. I honestly generally would gravitate you towards tried and true, just nickel plated steel. Give that a try first, see what your thoughts are. If you give that a try and you're not as happy with them and you want to try something that is a little bit more stable or maybe is capable of giving you a little bit of those experimentals on higher gauge strings and doing things like that, definitely stainless steel is really good too. So beyond that, there's another series of strings, and you'll hear these mentioned, especially a lot recently. And I'm not quite sure what's made this this trend kind of start again, but something called flat wound strings. Okay, so these strings are going to really dramatically change the way that you sound, your tone when you're playing. It's a very interesting, unique tone. You can tell when somebody is playing flat wound strings, or at least I can whenever I hear somebody playing them. They're really aimed at like jazz players and even slide guitar players. But I've noticed that there's a fair amount of people that have been playing in metal, of all things too, playing a lot more on flat wound strings. And I think it's just to be able to get a little bit of a different sound out of their performance and being able to do that, which is really interesting. But what makes them flat wound? Well, flat wound means that the string's outer coating is polished smooth. It's got no ridges on it whatsoever. Versus most guitar strings that do. They have a texture. You can feel the little grooves, the tiny grooves up most of nickel and steel wound strings. You'll feel that tiny groove there. Well, these flat round strings are just smooth as silk, because they're polished off all of those edges. So it makes a very unique sound. Like I mentioned, I think one of the best examples is a slide guitar, because you have a element that's pressing down the strings, usually like a polymer or a metal, right, on a slide that you're sliding up and down the fretboard. And the contact it's making is pushing directly onto the frets that are on that fretboard. And that contact is very smooth now because there's no ridges whatsoever. So you get a lot more sustain, and just the clarity out of those strings is a lot more. We'll also tell you, though, that there's a lot of detractors for that kind of sound too, depending. That really can change your tone in a not nice way for some types of musical genres. So again, you can play with those if you want to. I generally would tell you, if you're not playing jazz and you're not playing slide guitar, though, to probably not choose flat wound strings, okay? But all this information leads me to tell you once again, experiment with your choices on your guitar strings and brands, okay? Take into account your guitar manufacturer's advertisements and tolerances on string gauge. So that's really important. Like I mentioned, know your equipment to know what its tolerances are, so you know where you can start, okay? And where you can kind of work to find a sweet spot that works for you in your experimentation. Try different string material choices. Like I just mentioned, I would definitely go check out nickel-plated steel. I would check out your stainless steel wraps, and just see which works best for you, okay? Even some of these ones that are hybrid cobalt and all these other different fancy types of metal and whatnot, they'll all have a different unique sound. Some sound really great, others not so much. It's all going to depend on your ear and what you're trying to go for your style. Also, experimenting with different string gauges to find the ones that best suit you. This is something that's just going to come with time, just like I keep telling you to spend as much time as you can with your guitar. As you do this, it's also a good time for you, once you get past some of your initial learnings and while you're practicing, to start making some of these small changes with strings, and specifically even just string gauges. And you'll start to quickly hear a difference and also form an opinion for yourself on how it feels to you, and how the, especially if you're going thicker strings, how do those feel to your fingers when you're playing? And are you doing some guitar string bending and things and other kind of things to dramatize the way that you're playing? If you are, you're going to feel a difference in both the tone and naturally your fingers, and how they fatigue, and how the string actually feels against them when you're interfacing with your guitar. That's going to be a big deal. Obviously, it's going to be a big deal to you and how you feel when you're playing. So that's going to definitely be a big part of your experimentation, is playing with different string gauges to find the ones that suit you, the tone you're looking for, and your fingers best, okay? If you don't like the performance of guitar strings, you can always easily replace them. So remember, at most, you're basically going to be out the time that it takes to be able to change the strings and the actual cost of the strings themselves. So if you put a set of strings on your guitar, you're like, man, I hate these. I really don't like it. I'm not digging it. Take them off and go with something else, or just get back to something that you feel comfortable with. This isn't a choice that has to be something you make for life, okay? You can absolutely walk away from a bad set of strings you don't like. You don't have to suffer through them. You don't have to clear your plate, so to say, like it said. You can simply just, rinse, repeat with something different, and it's totally okay. Okay, so make sure you keep yourself open to that. Also, remember, drastic changes in your string gauge, okay, is going to more than likely require you to make truss rod and or intonation adjustments, as well as saddle adjustments, depending, to be able to get your strings to the proper height, so you're not getting a lot of fret buzz and having different problems like that. So be ready for that. If you're making extreme changes, your guitar may have to change with it to make those things happen, okay? And if you're trying to go too extreme than your equipment can handle, you may very well need to buy another guitar that's better suited for what you're doing. Okay, so do be aware of that. Do be aware of, if you're trying to go to extreme low tunings, for example, you might need to go with something that's like fan fret, or you may end up having to go with a baritone, or heck, even a 7 or 8 string guitar to be able to really account for those lower tones with something that's going to be able to support it with the hardware. Okay. Again, I'll go into some of those adjustments in the future, like being able to make intonation adjustments, adjusting your action, adjusting truss rod. We'll go into all of that in later videos. It's very much the same process, but approached differently on different guitars and vendors. Okay, so it's something that's a little tricky to show you across the board that'll work on every single guitar, but I can at least give you the core of what it means to do that, show you an example on one of my guitars, and then that will hopefully get you to a point where at least you understand the concepts. You can go to that, and if your guitar is about the same or it works for it, great. If not, at least you know what you're starting to look at to do your own research and figure out how to do that appropriately for your manufacturer. Okay, so that's really it. So that's my very long explanation on the introduction to making choices with guitar strings.